You look up at the night sky, right? And the moon is it's just there.
Yeah, a quiet, silvery disk. It's practically poetry.
Exactly. But if you rewind to 1969, the United States looked at that exact same moon and basically saw a ticking clock.
Oh, a massive ticking clock, because behind that quiet disk is a historical landscape that is, honestly, a total battlefield of information.
And welcome to the deep dive, by the way. Today we are jumping straight into what is arguably the ultimate did they or didn't they debate.
Right, because when we say battlefield, we mean the stakes were absolute global dominance. It's so easy for us today to view the Apollo 11 moon landing as settled history.
Totally.
But for a massive number of people, the debate is still wide open. And to understand why that even exists, you really have to strip away the modern nostalgia.
You really do. You have to put yourself right in the pressure cooker of the Cold War.
Exactly. Because the United States was officially losing the space race. And I mean, not just by a little margin.
No, the Soviet Union had completely humiliated them at almost every turn. I mean, the Soviets put the first satellite, Sputnik, into orbit.
Right.
And they sent up the first animal, and then the first human, Yuri Gagarin. America was playing a really desperate game of catch-up.
And that desperation, that is the crucial seed for every single theory we are looking at today.
Yep.
When national prestige is on the line and you are being outpaced by your greatest geopolitical rival, you have an overwhelming motive to fabricate a victory.
The motive is undeniable. So our mission today is to take a massive stack of sources, everything from official NASA records to viral internet conspiracy theories, and weigh the specific evidence.
We're talking visual anomalies, weird physics, missing data.
Exactly. We're going to put those claims right up against the actual scientific realities of space to see what holds up. Because once you establish that the U.S. had the motive to fake the landing, the immediate next question is how.
How do you fake an entirely alien lunar landscape using 1969 technology?
Right. Well, if the government couldn't actually build a rocket capable of getting to the moon, they'd naturally turn to the one industry that specializes in building convincing illusions.
Hollywood. Which brings us to the most pervasive narrative in this entire debate. The theory that NASA hired the legendary director Stanley Kubrick to secretly film the whole thing on a soundstage.
And they didn't just pick his name out of a hat, right?
No, definitely not. Kubrick had just released 2001, A Space Odyssey in 1968. That's literally the year before the moon landing.
And the special effects in that movie were they were light years ahead of anything else at the time.
They genuinely were. Kubrick pioneered these techniques that made space look incredibly realistic. He used front-screen projection and highly reflective materials called Scotchlite screens.
Wow.
Yeah, to create these vast, convincing backdrops. So for someone searching for a method to fake a moon landing, 2001 looks an awful lot like a multi-million-dollar audition tape.
I mean, people are so convinced by this that a few years ago, back in 2016, a video went totally viral claiming to show Stanley Kubrick actually confessing on camera.
Oh, I remember that one.
Yeah, the footage is grainy, the guy looks distressed, and he says he committed a massive fraud with NASA.
I have to burst that bubble immediately, though, because that video is unequivocally a hoax itself.
Really? Just a complete fake?
Yep. It's not a deep fake, it's just a heavily edited spoof. If you watch the raw, unedited footage of that same interview, you can literally hear a producer off camera coaching the man.
No way.
Yeah, the man is an actor named Tom, and the producer is telling him how to deliver the fake confession for a mockumentary. Kubrick had zero involvement.
Wow. Okay, I figured as much. But, the theorists don't stop at the fake confession. They pivot to Kubrick's actual movies.
Right, the hidden clues.
Exactly. Claiming he left a trail of breadcrumbs because he was so plagued by guilt. And the main source for this is his horror masterpiece, The Shining. I'm reading these claims from our sources, and they're incredibly specific. They point out that the little boy, Danny, wears a literal Apollo 11 sweater right before a terrifying scene.
That's one of the primary clues cited. Another is the carpet pattern in the Overlook Hotel.
Oh, the weird geometric one.
Yeah, theorists argue that geometric design is a hexagonal shape that perfectly mimics the layout of the launch pads at Cape Canaveral.
That's wow.
And they also highlight a very specific change Kubrick made from Stephen King's original novel. In the book, the haunted room is room 217, but Kubrick intentionally changed it to room 237 for the movie.
Okay, and the conspiracy angle there is that 237 represents the roughly 237,000-mile distance from the Earth to the Moon.
Right. That's exactly the argument. It's
Ah.
pitched as his secret confession hiding in plain sight.
But I have to say, looking at all these movie Easter eggs, well, it's like when you buy a red car, and suddenly you start seeing red cars absolutely everywhere.
Confirmation bias.
Exactly. When your brain is perfectly primed to see a massive government cover-up, a weird hotel carpet suddenly transforms into a secret message about Cape Canaveral.
It's textbook apophenia.
Right. You're just stitching random set design choices into a grand narrative because you want the narrative to be true.
Apophenia is a massive psychological driver here, yes.
Huh.
Finding patterns where none exist. But, the theorists aren't just relying on movie trivia.
They have actual photos, right?
Yeah, they argue that the Apollo photographs themselves are the real proof. They believe that if you look closely enough at the official NASA images, you can actually see the seams of Kubrick's soundstage.
Okay, so if the visual stuff is a soundstage, skeptics naturally go looking for the boom mic dropping into the frame, so to speak.
Exactly.
And the first thing they point to is the sky. In every famous Apollo photograph, the sky is pitch, ink black. But there are absolutely no stars. Not a single one.
Which throws people off.
Right. If you're standing on the moon with no atmosphere, shouldn't the sky be absolutely bursting with stars? Did Kubrick just, forget to turn on the starlights?
It's a completely understandable assumption, but the absence of stars has nothing to do with a missing backdrop and everything to do with how cameras actually capture light.
Okay, how so?
Well, you have to put yourself in the exact physical conditions of the astronauts. They landed during the lunar morning. The sun was blazing down on them with zero atmosphere to filter it.
Right, and they are wearing those massive, highly reflective white spacesuits.
Exactly. They're basically walking mirrors on a sun-drenched, highly reflective surface. To capture an image of a brilliantly lit astronaut without washing the entire photo out into a blinding white blur, the camera requires an incredibly fast shutter speed.
Oh, I see.
The shutter opens and closes in a fraction of a second. That is perfectly fine for capturing the bright lunar surface, but it's way too fast to let in the incredibly faint, distant light of the stars.
So it's like trying to take a photo of the night sky while standing directly under the floodlights of a baseball stadium.
Exactly. The camera adjusts to the blinding light right in front of it, and the stars just disappear.
Okay, that makes perfect sense for the stars. But I'm looking at these shadow photos from the sources, and this is where I genuinely get confused.
The non-parallel shadows?
Yeah. The shadows of the astronauts and the equipment, they don't run parallel. Some are pointing in completely different directions. If there is only one light source, the sun, how is that physically possible unless there are multiple studio spotlights positioned around a soundstage?
This is where our earthbound intuition completely betrays us. The non-parallel shadows are a result of basic visual perspective combined with an incredibly uneven landscape.
Okay, walk me through that.
Think of a long set of straight, parallel train tracks. As they stretch into the distance, they appear to converge toward a single vanishing point, right? Shadows behave the exact same way. Now, take that optical illusion and project those shadows onto a rolling, cratered, totally uneven lunar surface. The topography bends and distorts the shadows, making them look like they are pointing in different directions.
Okay, I can visualize that.
Yeah.
But what about the photos where an astronaut is standing completely in the pitch-black shadow of the lunar module, but they are still totally visible?
Ah, the bounce fill.
Yeah, like the sun is blocked.
Yeah.
They should be in total darkness.
They would be if the moon's surface was matte black. But lunar dust is highly reflective. The ground itself acts as a gigantic bounce fill reflector.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the harsh sunlight hits the surface all around the module and scatters in every direction, illuminating the astronauts even when they are standing in a direct shadow.
All right, I follow that. But the skeptics also point to the physical props. There's an infamous photograph of a lunar rock sitting on the ground and has a perfectly typed letter C on it.
The famous sea rock.
Yeah. And then there are these crosshairs on the camera lenses. They're called fiduciary markers, I think.
Yes, fiduciary markers.
In several photos, these black crosshairs inexplicably appear to go behind objects, like an astronaut's equipment. That really does feel like a smoking gun. It looks like the crosshair was physically painted onto a backdrop that was placed behind a prop.
Let's unpack both of those, starting with the sea rock. When archivists actually go back to the original high-quality master negative of that specific photograph, the C is completely missing. It literally doesn't exist.
Wait, really? Where did it come from then?
It turns out that Mark was nothing more than a stray hair or a piece of lint that got onto the glass during a later, lower-quality duplicate scan of the image.
Wait, a literal hair?
A literal hair.
That is hilarious.
And as for the crosshairs supposedly disappearing behind objects, those fiduciary lines etched into the camera are microscopically thin.
Okay.
When a photograph is taken of an incredibly bright, overexposed white area, like an astronaut's brightly lit suit, the chemical emulsion on the physical film essentially bleeds.
Oh, like the light spills over.
Exactly. The bright white areas overexpose and spill over the microscopic thin black lines, washing them out completely. They aren't going behind the object. The brightness of the object is just erasing the line on the film itself.
You know, just stepping back and thinking about the logic of this supposed hoax.
Yeah.
It's so contradictory.
Oh, so?
If this was truly a multi-billion-dollar Hollywood production, orchestrated by an obsessive perfectionist like Stanley Kubrick, why on earth would they make such incredibly amateur mistakes?
That's a great point.
You don't mastermind the greatest deception in human history and then say, oops, I left a prop rock with the letter C facing directly into the camera. It completely falls apart under its own premise.
It is a massive contradiction. You can't be an infallible criminal mastermind and a sloppy set designer at the exact same time.
Exactly.
But skeptics don't just stop at the photographs. Faking a still image is one thing. Faking actual physics and moving video footage in 1969 is a much, much harder problem.
Right. The visual quirks can be written off as camera exposure, but skeptics look at how things physically interact on the surface. The most famous example is the American flag.
Naturally.
The video clearly shows it waving and rippling. On a moon with absolutely zero atmosphere and therefore zero wind, a flag should just hang totally limp.
NASA actually anticipated that exact problem. A limp flag wouldn't make for a very heroic historical photograph. So they specifically engineered the flagpole with a horizontal rod extending across the top to hold the fabric out flat.
But it's clearly swinging back and forth in the footage. I've seen it.
Yes, and the reason it does that is precisely because it's in a vacuum.
Wait, what?
Yeah. To plant the flag, the astronauts had to forcefully twist the stiff aluminum pole back and forth to grind it into the hard lunar surface.
Okay.
That twisting motion transferred a huge amount of kinetic energy into the fabric. Here on Earth, the thick air friction would quickly act as a brake, slowing that motion down.
Oh, I see. But on the moon?
In the vacuum of space, there is no air resistance. The flag acts like a pendulum, swaying back and forth from that initial twisting energy for a surprisingly long time before finally settling.
That is wild. Okay, let's look at the lunar module itself then. This is a multi-ton piece of metal that drops out of the sky. It has to fire a massive rocket engine to slow down and land.
Right.
And yet, when you look at the photos underneath it, there is no blast crater. The ground is totally undisturbed. And when the upper half of the module takes off to return to orbit, you can't see any flames coming out of the engine.
Again, this is where we project Earth physics onto an alien environment. First, the moon has only 1/6 of Earth's gravity.
Right, yeah.
So the module was incredibly light by the time it landed, meaning it required significantly less thrust than you would expect. Second, the descent engine was actually cut off when the module was still about 10 feet in the air.
So it basically free fell the rest of the way.
Exactly. And most importantly, without an atmosphere, the exhaust gas expands rapidly outward into the vacuum. It doesn't form a tight, focused column of pressure that would carve out a crater in the hard-packed bedrock beneath the dust.
That makes sense. But what about the invisible fire during takeoff? How do you have a rocket without a giant plume of fire?
They used what are called hypergolic propellants.
Hypergolic?
Yeah, that's a highly technical way of saying they used two specific chemicals, dinitrogen tetroxide and unsymmetrical dimethylhydrazine, that violently ignite the absolute second they touch each other.
So they don't even need a spark.
No complex sparking mechanism at all, making them extremely reliable. But the key here is that they do not need oxygen to burn.
Oh, wow.
And because they burn without oxygen in a vacuum, the resulting exhaust is entirely transparent. There was a flame, you just couldn't see it, especially against the blinding glare of the lunar morning.
The skeptics also target the footage of the astronauts walking, right? The theory is that NASA just filmed guys in heavy suits walking around on a soundstage and then slowed the video down by 2.5 times to make it look like low gravity.
It's a very common claim, but it instantly falls apart the moment you apply actual physics analysis to the footage. Just look at the tires of the lunar rover kicking up dirt as they drive.
What happens with the dirt?
That dust travels in perfect, undisturbed parabolic arcs before hitting the ground. That is strictly only possible in a total vacuum.
Right, if you try that in a studio on Earth, the air would catch the fine dust and turn it into a massive billowing cloud trailing behind the car.
Exactly. Furthermore, physicists have analyzed the footage of an astronaut jumping. By measuring his hang time and the trajectory of his arc, they calculated his downward acceleration.
And what was it?
It comes out to exactly 1.62 meters per second squared. That is the exact mathematical constant of lunar gravity. You simply could not fake that math on a soundstage in 1969.
I think a lot of the disbelief stems from how incredibly clumsy the astronauts look, though. They're constantly stumbling, falling over, and doing this bizarre, awkward bunny hop to move around. It just looks comical.
It does look strange to us, but it was a very real physical necessity.
You know, the sources had this brilliant analogy that really clicked for me. Imagine you're sprinting across a slick ice rink, and you're wearing a massive 100-pound backpack.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
Because you are on the moon, your local weight is reduced by 1/6. You feel light. But your physical mass and your inertia, the actual laws of momentum, remain totally identical to what they are on Earth.
That is the perfect way to conceptualize it. Your body wants to keep moving at the same force.
Right, so if you try to lean forward to turn a corner or try to stop on a dime on that ice rink, your mass is going to violently carry your momentum forward.
Which explains the hopping.
Yeah, that's why they had to do the bunny hop. It wasn't them playing around. It was literally the only physical way to keep their center of gravity directly beneath them so they didn't completely faceplant into the regolith.
And falling over was a genuine risk. In those stiff, pressurized suits, recovering from a fall was incredibly difficult and exhausting.
Okay, so the surface physics definitely hold up. But even if the surface footage is mathematically authentic, a massive segment of the skepticism revolves around the journey itself.
Getting to the moon.
Right. Skeptics argue that human beings could never have survived the trip through space.
Yeah.
And that the physical artifacts we supposedly brought back are completely fraudulent.
Let's take the journey first, because the primary hurdle cited by theorists is the Van Allen radiation belts.
Those are the massive magnetic fields.
Yeah, massive donut-shaped regions of intense, trapped radiation circling the Earth, held in place by our magnetic field. The argument is that flying through them would have instantly and fatally cooked the crew.
Because NASA didn't line the spacecraft with heavy lead shielding. And honestly, this is a point that always sounded logical to me. When I go to the dentist for an x-ray, they put a heavy lead vest on me to protect my organs. So if you're flying through a radioactive field in space, why wouldn't you wrap the ship in lead?
It seems incredibly intuitive based on our daily lives. But in the physics of deep space, using lead would have been a fatal mistake.
Really? Why?
The Van Allen belts are packed with highly energetic beta particles. Think of those particles like speeding bullets. If you shoot a bullet into a pool of water, which represents a lighter metal like aluminum, the bullet safely slows down.
Okay, that makes sense.
But if you shoot that same bullet into a solid steel wall representing dense lead, it shatters upon impact, creating a spray of dangerous shrapnel. In physics, that shrapnel is secondary X-ray radiation.
Oh, wow.
NASA knew that if beta particles hit heavy lead, the lead itself would emit deadly X-rays right into the cabin.
So wrapping the ship in lead would have essentially turned the entire cabin into a lethal, glowing X-ray machine.
Oh. Precisely. So they wisely built the hull out of lighter metals like aluminum and steel, which safely absorb the particles.
That's brilliant.
Beyond the materials, they also planned the trajectory perfectly. They aimed for the thinnest, least dense regions of the belts, and they blasted through them at nearly 39,000 kilometers per hour.
They just sped right through the weakest part.
Yep. By not using lead, flying fast, and aiming for the edges, the astronauts absorbed a totally safe radiation dose of only about 1.14 rads for the entire mission. That's actually less radiation than some industrial workers get in a year.
Wow. We have the science to back all this up.
Hmm.
But I do think we have to acknowledge the things NASA actually did mess up.
We do.
Because when a government agency acts incompetent, It really fuels modern skepticism, like
Hmm.
the fact that NASA literally lost the original high-quality telemetry tapes of the Apollo 11 landing.
Yeah, it is an undeniable, spectacular, historic blunder.
How does that even happen?
The absolute highest quality original analog data tapes were accidentally recorded over by technicians in the 1980s because there was a magnetic tape shortage.
A tape shortage.
It's incredibly frustrating. Fortunately, the 16 millimeter film reels survived and were preserved, but losing the raw telemetry data was a massive, self-inflicted blow to their archival record.
And then there is the absolute comedy of the Rijksmuseum moonrock. I mean, you can't blame people for being skeptical when a major national institution gets completely fooled.
Oh yes, this happened in 1988. A rock was gifted to the Dutch National Museum.
And the story was that it had been presented to a former prime minister of the Netherlands by the U.S. ambassador during the Apollo 11 Global Goodwill Tour.
They insured this rock for $500,000. It was a prized possession.
But years later, experts actually tested it, and it turned out to be a piece of petrified wood. It was a complete fake.
So embarrassing.
And the best part is the accompanying note, which was supposedly an official typed document from NASA. It spelled the word center the British way, C-E-N-T-R-E, and put a weird hyphen in Apollo 11. It's totally absurd.
It's a hilarious and deeply embarrassing incident. It was likely a diplomatic misunderstanding or just an outright prank, but we have to rigorously contrast that single Dutch fake with the actual 382 kilograms of genuine moon rocks brought back across the various Apollo missions.
Right, the real samples.
Those real samples have been distributed to and tested by thousands of independent scientists across the globe. Their unique isotopic signatures, the sheer lack of any water exposure, it categorically proves their lunar origin. You just can't fake the atomic makeup of a rock.
But, if we want the ultimate undeniable proof, we really just have to look back at the geopolitics. We have to talk about the Soviet Union.
Without a doubt, if you are looking for impartial verification of the moon landing, you look at the enemies of the United States.
Exactly.
The Soviets were actively tracking the Apollo 11 spacecraft on their own radar. In fact, they were actively communicating with the Americans to ensure that their own robotic probe, Luna 15, which was in lunar orbit at the very same time, didn't accidentally crash into the Apollo 11 command module.
The irony here is just incredible to me. Think about it. The greatest enemy of the United States, the nation with the absolute most to gain from exposing a fake American moon landing, didn't just stay quiet.
No, they didn't.
They verified the flight path. Later on, they even offered rescue assistance for the Apollo 13 crew. And their own Academy of Sciences confirmed the authenticity of the lunar soil that the Americans brought back and share with them.
They had every motive and the technological radar means to expose a fraud to the entire world. But they accepted the achievement as historical fact.
They did. Which brings us to the core of why this debate even exists today.
Right. When we step back and look at this mountain of sources, what does this all actually mean?
We look at the visual anomalies, converging shadows, the pitch-black sky, the flag waving in a vacuum. The real takeaway isn't that it's a hoax.
Not at all.
The real reason people think the moon landing is fake is because our human brains are entirely hardwired for Earth's physics.
That is the most profound realization of this entire debate. The vacuum of deep space, the harsh, unfiltered sunlight, a world with 1/6 gravity, it completely defies our earthly intuition.
It really does.
We naturally expect things to look, fall, and behave the way they do in our own backyards. And when they don't, our brains flag it as a glitch. We reject it as artificial because it is genuinely alien to our experience.
But the physics hold up. The evidence proves it was real. We did go to the moon.
We definitely did.
And yet, no human being has returned since Apollo 17 in 1972. Which brings us to a lingering mystery, something for you to chew on after this deep dive is over.
Oh, this is a chilling claim that still circulates through the community today.
Yeah, it involves a former airman who held a top-secret clearance and was working at NASA's Langley Field back in 1965 during the crucial build-up to the Apollo missions.
Right. He claimed that one day, a colleague pulled him into a dark room and showed him highly classified photographs taken of the dark side of the moon.
And what he saw in those photos wasn't just craters and gray dust. He described seeing massive, mushroom-shaped buildings and huge spherical towers. Real structures.
It's a terrifying thought.
It really is. So we'll leave you with this provocative thought. When you look up at that quiet, silvery disk in the night sky tonight, ask yourself, what if the real reason we haven't been back in over 50 years isn't just a lack of funding or a shift in technology?
What if it's a genuine fear of what was actually found waiting for us up there?